What's the most horrible thing you've ever done? Story 1. A couple of summers ago, I got into the 9 to 5 routine, doing an internship at a big insurance company. Driving to work one day, this one guy was really frustrating me, speeding at the worst times, cutting through traffic, making reckless lane changes. I ended up catching up to him at the next red light, in the lane next to him and a few cars ahead. So being petty, I decided I wasn't going to let him change lanes this time and boxed him in when he tried next. I ended up doing this for a few kilometers. Turns out when we hit the next traffic light, he pulled into the emergency animal hospital. He didn't even park in a proper spot, just stopped the car, picked his dog up out of the back seat, and ran inside. The worst part was my window was open, so I heard the dog wailing in pain all the way inside. It scarred me forever. Edit. To be fair, at the time I didn't feel like I was doing anything wrong or dangerous. I didn't go out of my way to make sure he couldn't cut through traffic or speed anymore. I just kept driving side by side with the car ahead of him, staying at the speed limit. That's what I meant by boxed in. It was a smaller road with 2 lanes going each way, with no median or emergency lane. I wasn't trying to enforce laws, act like the police, or drive in a rage. I was 18 years old, and ever since then, I give people the right of way and let them drive how they want. Story 2. When I was little, my family used to play a game in public places where we competed to identify the most unusual-looking person. When I was around 9 or so, we went to a theme park with a large number of visibly overweight individuals. The game was going great, and being a little kid, I started getting a little too enthusiastic. I spotted probably the heaviest person I had ever seen in my life. I knew this one was going to win me the game, so at the top of my lungs I shouted, "Look at that man, he is so big, I win." I am literally unable to describe the pain in the look he gave me. Even as a kid, I knew I had crossed a line. Looking back now, I still cringe. It felt like I had crushed any remaining self-worth he had left, all in one awful moment. Story 3. I don't know if it was the worst thing I've done, but it's definitely up there. When I was in high school, I put a firecracker in a friend's toilet. I don't know why. I thought it would be funny. When it went off, it cracked the toilet in a few places and started to leak a little. My friend, who was a bigger guy, came to see what the noise was, and I told him it was just the toilet seat dropping. He told me to get out because he needed to use the bathroom, and I figured this was a great chance for the prank to play out, and for me to get out of trouble. After about 10 seconds, I heard a noise from the bathroom, like plates hitting the floor but not breaking, and then an agonizing yell. The scream terrified me, and after a few minutes, he came out of the bathroom in his boxers with blood all over. Turns out he had sat on the toilet and it broke, cutting him up pretty badly. I never told him what really happened, and he blamed his weight for it. It gave him a complex for the rest of school. I still feel terrible about it. Story 4. When I was in middle school, I developed strong feelings for my best friend's girlfriend. After they broke up, she friend-zoned me, messaging me on AIM whenever I was online to talk about how miserable she was without him. One day, I got tired of it and told her how I felt. I naively believed that if she knew I cared about her, she would give me a chance to treat her better than my friend ever had. Of course, that didn't happen. She made it clear she didn't have romantic feelings for me, and I played off the confession as a joke. But the AIM conversations continued and became more troubling. She told me her parents were abusive, but later admitted her father had only slapped her once. Her weight became an obsession. Convinced she wasn't attractive to my friend because of it, she wasn't overweight. She considered developing an eating disorder. Finally, one night, she started a conversation with me. I replied, "Hey, fatty," and she never messaged me again. Now she works as an exotic dancer. No joke. Story 5. Okay, so here's a pretty messed up story. The summer after my freshman year in high school, I went on a school-sanctioned trip to Chile and Peru. There were about 15 of us, including a bunch of my friends, so it was a good time. Near the end of the trip, we were staying in a small hotel in Cusco, Peru, which is at an elevation of about 11,000 feet. We had no plans for the rest of the night after unpacking, so everybody was just messing around and having fun unwinding. I was staying in a hotel room with 2 of my friends. Now I'll elaborate if anyone wants me to, but after a particularly hilarious series of events, 2 of the girls on our trip ended up locked in our bathroom. It was funny at first, but I was feeling a little sick from the altitude and kind of felt like I needed to use the bathroom. Since I couldn't go into ours, I went downstairs to the girls' room to use theirs. When I walked into the room, one of the hotel staff was still tidying up since we hadn't been there very long, and some of the rooms weren't quite ready when we arrived. I smiled at him and walked into the bathroom. When I lifted the toilet seat, the water level seemed a little low. I was suspicious for a second, but then thought, I'm in Peru. Their toilets probably function differently than American toilets, so this must be normal. Well, I finished using the bathroom and flushed. The water level started to rise, and I was mortified when I realized it wasn't going to stop. Turns out the toilet was clogged. So all of this brown, filthy water was flowing out of the toilet and onto the floor. I remember distinctly that my first thought was, holy crap! I started to panic, looking around frantically for anything that might help the situation, but there weren't any towels. This all happened so quickly that I was kind of in a daze and wasn't thinking straight. Fueled mostly by adrenaline, I casually walked out of the bathroom while trying to keep a straight face. The man was still finishing up the room. I carefully closed the door behind me and left as quickly as possible. I should have said something to him, but I just couldn't do it. From the guy's point of view, he was just doing his job when I casually walked into the bathroom, made a huge mess, and left without saying a word. I can't even imagine what his reaction must have been when he went to put more towels in and found the floor completely covered in water. I made my way back upstairs to my room and didn't say a word about it to anybody. Story 6. 3 years ago, I was going through a difficult divorce. I decided to try an online dating site for a random hookup just to get it out of my system. After a few weeks, I got a message from a 19-year-old girl. Now I was in my 30s, but I wasn't about to turn down the attention. Fast forward a week or two of chatting, and I learned she lived in a town about an hour away. I also learned she had extremely low self-esteem and said she was a virgin. To make it more surreal, she resembled my soon-to-be ex-wife and even had a similar name. Normally, I'm a decent person, but I was going through one of the most mentally and emotionally stressful times of my life, and I made a poor decision to use this girl as a rebound. Fast forward another week, and I had her convinced that I liked her and that she was ready for her first experience. I met her at a theater in her town. We watched a movie, had lunch, and I drove her an hour back to my place. During our conversations, I told her I liked it a bit rough and wanted to explore some boundaries. She passively agreed, clearly eager for attention. A few hours later, we had been intimate, tried different things, and she stayed the night. She was quiet afterwards, obviously having not enjoyed much of it. Still, we were intimate a few more times that night. Now here's where things got even more complicated. My divorce was nearly finalized, and I had made arrangements to move to a new apartment and change my phone number. This becomes relevant shortly. At no point did I tell her my real name. I used a childhood nickname and never mentioned my last name, and she never asked. When I brought her to my place, I took a confusing, non-direct route through back roads to get her there, and a different route when taking her home. Fast forward a week. I had stopped replying to her messages, and even if she got a ride, she wouldn't have been able to find me because I had moved and she didn't know my real name. I put her out of my mind and tried to move on. The final twist. I logged back into the dating site a few weeks later and found multiple messages from her, ending with one that said she had missed her period and tested positive on a pregnancy test. Story 7. All right, this thread has gotten pretty long, but I need to tell the world about this. My cousin and I used to vacation with one another's family. One year as teenagers, he met a girl and connected with her at the beach. Most people would understand that vacation romances end when the trip is over. She didn't. She continued to call, email, and message him about 15 times a day. She confessed her love and said she was planning to move to Pittsburgh just to be with him. Obviously, this wasn't going to work. He had a girlfriend at home. A couple of weeks after the vacation, he and I came up with a plan to get her to stop. I called her one night and told her he had been taken to the hospital with a football injury. I said a blood clot formed during surgery, and he passed away on the operating table. I may or may not have left this on her answering machine. The next day, after my cousin left for school, his mom got a call from the girl's mother, expressing deep sympathy for her son's passing. My aunt panicked. She thought something terrible had happened on the way to school. She called my mom, and there was a huge screaming match with my cousin and me. In the end, I had to apologize to the girl and her mother and admit it was all a mistake. So that night, I sat down to call her in front of my mom so she could verify I actually did it. I dialed my own phone number, which obviously went straight to voicemail. I carried on a 10-minute half conversation with my voicemail, crying, apologizing, making my mom cry too. And that was that. We never heard from the girl again. My cousin and I still talk about it from time to time, but no one else ever knew. Story 8. I realized when I was young that I had an interest in girls. Then once junior high hit, around 13 years old, I ended up coming out to my best friend. She never told me she was interested in girls, but she was curious. So we spent the whole summer together as girlfriends but wanted to keep it a secret. We still thought it was wrong. Either way, once school started, she continued to want to date openly, kissing me, holding hands, writing love letters, etc. But I was so scared someone would find out. So I ignored her. I ignored her for the first half of the school year. Didn't talk about it, didn't look her in the eye, nothing. Then one day she came up to me in class crying, with a letter saying things like, "I miss you. I've never been happier than when I was with you. Please be mine again." And I looked her in the eye and ripped it up in front of her. She completely broke down in front of the class, and I wouldn't explain why. Of course, whenever someone asked about it, I would say she was lying and it never happened. We're still Facebook friends, but we don't really talk. And she's very different now. Story 9. I once found out a girl's Facebook password. I logged in and messaged her from a friend's account saying I wanted a photo in exchange for giving the password back. She ended up having her sister take it and send it. I hate myself for this and wish I could apologize, but I've forgotten her full name and deleted the photo shortly afterward. I also visited and lost my virginity to a professional, though it was a half-hour session and I didn't even finish. I had been on SSRIs for a while and dealt with lingering side effects. I ran red lights when I was late for the SATs. To be fair, it was like 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday, and no one else was on the road. I looked both ways before running them. Still, it was reckless. While driving under the influence of cannabis and Adderall, I think I accidentally cut off an ambulance trying to turn left across my lane. I saw it swerve and then turn away. I still wonder if I may have delayed them and possibly made things worse for someone. I don't take Adderall anymore, and I rarely smoke now because it causes me panic attacks. I really dislike the person I used to be. Story 10. During a game of minnows and whales at a public pool, I faked drowning. I was being brought to the surface, which is part of the game, and decided to let my body go limp. I lay face down for a few seconds on the surface before someone dragged me out. They laid me beside the pool and began panicking. I just lay there with my eyes closed and breathing as slowly and deeply as I possibly could. Everyone around me was convinced I had stopped breathing. An ambulance was called to the scene and arrived with sirens blaring and lights flashing. The paramedics didn't know what to make of it as I began sporadically panting and then holding my breath again. They decided to rush me to the hospital. It took the doctor about 30 seconds to realize I was faking it. I heard my mom arrive and heard the doctor say to her, "He is just laying there with his eyes closed. Take him home." She came and got me, and we went home. I then proceeded to bury that memory as deep as I could. Story 11. I was in love with this girl. We had known each other for years, but the timing was never right for us to be together. Eventually, she met a guy who was about to go into the army, and they were planning to get married. I understood when she told me, but I couldn't let that happen. I knew my life would never feel right without her, so I stayed around, made friends with the guy. This went on for about 9 months. I found out where he came from, about his difficult family situation, and how he had been struggling with addiction before meeting her. He had cleaned up and promised to stay straight forever. He truly loved her and was joining the army to support them both. One night, my opportunity came. They had a fight, and he was at my friend's house to cool off. We were hanging out, they were drinking, and I brought out my bottle of prescribed medication. I crushed up one of the pills and let my friend take a line. I took one myself and offered one to him. I knew he would take it because I understood the mindset. I had my own struggles. He hesitated. I rationalized it for him, told him it was just once, just one pill, that he deserved to relax one last time before boot camp. He had been clean for a long time. He could handle it. Eventually, he gave in. He took it, then took another the next day. I gave him 2 more. That was all it took. He relapsed, started using again, was disqualified from the army, and the girl broke up with him. I was there for her. We ended up together for a short time, about a month. Then we broke up. I don't know what happened to him. Story 12. At the age of 18 or 19, I was seeing this girl, Pam. She was a really cool person. Worked as a projectionist at an indie theater, smart, had unique taste in music, and was just all around fun and interesting. We got back to my apartment after a night of house parties and ended up on the couch watching TV for maybe 5 minutes before things started heating up. Out of nowhere, while we were kissing, I suddenly tasted salt water. She was crying. She told me not to worry, she was just thinking about something from the past. I asked her to talk, and eventually she told me she had been assaulted by her father at a very young age. And sometimes when she drank, it brought those memories back. We ended up talking the entire night until we fell asleep together on the couch. The next morning she was up before me, made breakfast, and seemed relieved to have finally shared that piece of her past. We ate and then cuddled on the couch. We started making out again, but I noticed I wasn't getting aroused at all. Nothing. She realized this after a while and asked, "Is it because of what I told you last night?" "I'm sorry, it wasn't my fault. He made me." I tried to comfort her and said, "Please don't apologize for something that monster did. If he wasn't already gone, I'd want justice for what he did to you." We never became intimate again. It ended about 2 weeks later. One night we were in bed and she asked why. I blurted out, "All I can think of now is you as someone who's been hurt. I want to help you, not be with you that way." She ran out, getting dressed while crying. I tried to apologize, but it was too late. If there's a place for people who failed others, I'll see myself there. Story 13. Obvious throwaway, but since this thread hit the front page, no one will see my comment. I've never told anyone this, but when I was 14, I wasn't very well liked. I had friends, but I wasn't one of the popular kids. Like in every school, there were bullies, and one of them in particular had it out for me. Let's call him Billy the Bully. I'm not sure what about me he disliked so much, but he made my life miserable. He would get into my locker. We had cheap lockers that could be opened with a paperclip, steal my books, and sabotage me when I tried to talk to girls. You name it, he did it. He also knew my family was pretty well off, and his family, while not poor, wasn't rich either. He had a reputation for stealing from teachers, the gym, the nurse's office, yet somehow he never got caught. One day I'd had enough. I spread a rumor that my mom had just sold some antiques my late grandmother had left us, worth a few $1,000s, and that we had the cash at home. I knew he'd try to break in and steal it. I waited for weeks and he never came. Then one day he finally did. I had left the back patio door unlocked by mistake. I was hiding in my parents' room where I figured he'd go to look for the money. When he opened the door, I confronted him. I had practiced my story over and over again. I called my parents first, then the police. I told them I heard someone in the house, ran into my parents' room, and found my dad's old revolver. When the door opened, I panicked and acted in self-defense. I didn't realize who it was until afterward. There were a lot of difficult days being questioned by the police, and my parents put me in therapy to cope. My school found out, and there was a surprising amount of sympathy. Suddenly, I had more people wanting to hang out with me, some just because of the story. But I didn't care. I wasn't bullied anymore. Story 14. I was at a bar and got really drunk one night. The next morning, I realized I had a girl's number in my phone, but had no memory of what she looked like. We texted for a while and eventually decided to hang out. When I picked her up, she came out of her house smiling. Unfortunately, her smile revealed one of the worst sets of crooked teeth I had ever seen. Still, I wanted to be polite, so I went through with the date. A couple of weeks later, I was catching up with some friends at lunch. A girl nearby smiled at us, and my buddies commented on her appearance. Eventually, I told them the story about the girl I had dated. One of my friends asked if she was attractive, and I replied, louder than I should have, "She would be if her teeth weren't so messed up." Right after I said it, I looked over and realized the girl sitting nearby had the same expression and the same teeth. I immediately connected the dots. She had heard everything. The look on her face was one of the most painful expressions I've ever seen, and I've never felt like a bigger jerk in my life. Story 15. I'm a former addict. Today marks 69 days clean, and I'm proud of that. You asked for the worst thing I've done, and it's hard to choose, but this one stays with me. My mom used to pay me to pick up my 25-year-old autistic brother from his special education classes. The school was far away, and she was uncomfortable driving on the highway. Coincidentally, his school was near a city that was known as a hotspot for drug activity, and also where I used to get what I needed. One day I was picking up my brother, and I was going through withdrawal. It was intense. Cold sweats, shivers, body aches. At that point, I wasn't thinking straight. I drove with my brother into that area and bought what I needed, like I'd done so many times. Only this time, I wasn't alone. My brother was in the car. He has severe autism and cannot communicate. He didn't understand any of it, and to this day, I hate myself for that decision. I risked both our lives just to feed an addiction. That moment still haunts me. I've done a lot of reckless things, but endangering someone who depends on me, someone who had no way to even know what was happening, that was the worst of it. I'm working on becoming better. That memory is one of the reasons I stay clean. Story 16. I was a counselor at a sleepaway camp and wanted to get a few laughs from the kids, so I put on a full-body green spandex suit. I went to a hockey game where some of my campers were playing, and while I was there, one of the younger kids figured out it was me inside the suit. He came over and started messing with me, even trying to pull at the costume. It was playful at first, but in the middle of that, I accidentally elbowed him in the stomach. Pretty hard. He doubled over and started crying loudly. The game stopped and people rushed over to see what happened. I panicked. I picked him up and carried him back to the bunk while still wearing the ridiculous green suit. Once we got back, I gave him $30 and asked him not to tell anyone. I was terrified of getting fired. Thankfully, no one realized it was me inside the suit, or I might have been out of a job. It was an accident, but I still felt awful about it. Story 17. In kindergarten, we had an exchange student from Peru who had been in a house fire that tragically took the lives of his parents and siblings. He had suffered third and even fourth-degree burns that left him disfigured. Even at the young age of 5, we all knew it wasn't okay to make fun of him or treat him differently. Everyone treated him kindly, and he was a really nice kid. Except one day at recess, he accidentally knocked my buddy off the monkey bars, causing a minor bruise. My friend immediately started saying some really hurtful things to the student, and I, being the friend I thought I was, joined in. We ended up making him cry, but he never told anyone. He moved back to Peru at the end of the school year, and I never got the chance to apologize. It's been over 20 years since then, but I still feel deeply ashamed for how I acted that day. Story 18. At some point when I was young, my older sister asked me to get her a drink, some soda from the outside fridge. I didn't want to, but after an argument and my parents stepping in, I was told to do it. I went out, poured half a drink, and then added antifreeze into the rest. I stared at what I had done for about a minute before snapping out of it and dumping it behind the house. Grass still doesn't grow well in that spot. I ended up pouring her a new drink in the same cup. Something about it made me feel like I'd gone far enough without actually hurting anyone. I also melted her Barbie dolls and tried to interfere with her friendships. Later in life, I was involved with a girl without using protection. She almost got pregnant. I was emotionally distant with her, and once we were in the clear, I started drifting away. She eventually broke down and told me she had written a poem about me. It was dark and emotional. I talked her down from a bad emotional place and slowly pulled away completely. Since then, I've been cautious around anyone who becomes emotionally dependent on me. I've done a lot of wrong things in relationships. I once had a brief affair with someone while she was still dating a guy in the military. They broke up, and she fell into a deep depression, isolating herself. I later heard she had a child, not mine or his, but none of that compares to what I consider the worst. I had a great friend, someone who brought a lot of good into my life. He was an orphan. His mother died from substance abuse, and his father passed away from a medical overdose. Despite all that, he was happy, just a little eccentric. He got into drugs during middle school, and I distanced myself from him. Ironically, around the time he got clean, I got involved with substances. His grandfather died, and he was no longer welcome at his grandma's home. He started couch surfing and got into running, lost weight, and seemed to be doing better. Then he started dating someone in senior year, and I was genuinely happy for him. One day he called me, saying he had made a huge mistake. I drove over to meet him near a bridge. He had been crying, and he showed me something horrifying. His girlfriend had been severely injured in what he described as a firework accident. I couldn't process it. I panicked and left. Later, she was reported missing and found near a lake. His guardians hadn't noticed he was gone. Nothing was ever printed in the papers, and I never heard anything about him again. None of us did. Story 19. I was about to leave for military basic training. I was scared and started seeking as many romantic connections as I could, thinking I might not come back. I began flirting heavily with a girl who had always just been a friend. She had a boyfriend, but I didn't know him, and that made it easier for me to ignore the situation. After a few weeks, she ended things with him. The night before I left, I was saying goodbye to friends. When I said goodbye to her, she leaned in for a kiss. I turned away, telling her I didn't want to start something serious if I was going to leave the next day. The worst part is what I found out later. Apparently, the breakup hit the other guy really hard. His life began spiraling, and about a year later, I was told he had taken his own life. He dressed up, went out to an orchard, and left a note. I'll never know for sure if my actions were a factor or if there were deeper struggles he was facing. But even now, part of me wonders if I had made different choices, if he would still be here. That thought stays with me. Story 20. I was always the calm and quiet kid. I minded my own business and really only spoke when spoken to. One day, though, my father and stepmother got into one of their usual heated arguments. They had been together for a number of years by that point, and I had grown used to it. I nonchalantly turned on some music and waited for the storm to pass, like I usually did. Part of me must have been subconsciously taking some satisfaction in the fact that they weren't getting along. I always disliked my stepmother because I distinctly heard her say some rather disrespectful things about my biological mother. What followed was anything but calm. I threw my door open and stepped into their argument. Before I even realized it, I was shouting every insult I could think of at this woman. I called her things like a disgraceful excuse for a parent, a selfish and inconsiderate person, and a burden on everyone around her. As a bit of an afterthought, I told her that her cooking tasted like something you'd scrape off the bottom of a trash bin. There was genuine shock in both of their eyes. Something about the normally composed stepson suddenly erupting in fury clearly caught them off guard. All my stepmother could manage was a stuttered, "What is wrong with you?" My dad stepped in, told me to go back to my room, and tried to defuse the situation. Later, I overheard her ranting to my dad, "I can't believe your son called me all those horrible things." That all happened a few years ago, but it definitely left a lasting impact on the relationship between me and my stepmother. We still don't get along, and a cold sideways glance is about as close to conversation as we ever get. Interestingly, she seems to have taken my comment about her cooking to heart. Apparently, she doesn't do much of it anymore. Story 21. Not even sure if this will get read, but here goes. Summer of 2006, I was deployed to Baghdad with the 4th Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division. I was a 63B light wheel vehicle mechanic, so I didn't leave the FOB much. When I wasn't in the motor pool, I would be assigned to the guard towers overlooking the city. There was one tower in particular that overlooked a nearby neighborhood with lots of children. For anyone who's been deployed, you know that the local kids are always asking for anything: snacks, gear, water. So we used to toss them hoo-ah bars, bottles of water, and other things when we could. After a few days, a couple of the kids started getting upset because we wouldn't give them our multi-tools, which they kept asking for. Trying to de-escalate the situation in a lighthearted way, I asked them if they wanted some peach-flavored water, just regular water with a powdered drink mix in it. Their eyes lit up, so I poured a bit out of my bottle, mixed in the flavor powder, and handed it down to them. After drinking it, they realized it didn't taste quite right and stormed off, only to come back a little while later with a few more kids. They started throwing rocks toward our position. We ended up having to call QRF, Quick Reaction Force, and the kids were escorted away. Looking back, I know it wasn't the most mature way to handle the situation, but at the time, frustration got the better of us. It's something that still sticks with me, not out of pride, but as one of those moments you don't forget during a deployment. Story 22. When I was a kid, I was at a playground with a bunch of other kids my age, and one boy brought his little brother along. We all took turns sitting in the middle of the playground carousel and having the others spin it as fast as they could. The carousel had gravel around it, but we kicked it away so we could get a better grip in the dirt underneath. The boy's little brother got on the carousel, and since he was smaller, we all spun it as hard as we could. He started to look scared, but we kept going. I grabbed one of the bars and gave it a huge push with all my strength. He lost his grip and flew off into the gravel. He looked up at me with a face that said, "You did this to me." He started crying, and kids from across the playground ran over. His arm looked badly hurt, and everyone was horrified. Eventually, the boy's dad arrived and carried him away to the hospital. Story 23. About a year ago, a few of us went camping, though it was more like a drinking trip in the middle of nowhere, to celebrate a friend's birthday. None of us could have predicted how things would turn out. We drove around for a while looking for a spot. This was in Iceland, and if you know Iceland, you know that outside of Reykjavik there are small villages and endless empty stretches of nature, desolate but beautiful. Eventually, we found an old farm near a grassy hill in a deep fjord and decided to camp there. The party started and we all got pretty drunk. There may have been some questionable substances involved. As you'd expect, intoxicated people do dumb things, and we were no exception. We found a tool shed nearby and, with no bathrooms in sight, used it as a makeshift toilet. By the end of the night, it was a mess. We also found some wheelbarrows, which we ended up destroying and using as firewood for a massive campfire. The fire spread more than we expected and ended up damaging part of the field. For some reason, one of us had a large axe. Don't ask. We used it to break into the farmhouse, assuming it was abandoned. It looked old and worn down, and in Iceland, exploring old buildings like that isn't uncommon. But once we got inside, we saw clean beds, a working TV, and a fridge stocked with fresh food. We realized far too late that this was not abandoned at all. It was someone's actual home. Hours later, the homeowner returned. He was an elderly man, and he came back to find his front door destroyed, his backyard full of trash and tents, his tool shed damaged, and his property in disarray. He called the police, who came and questioned us. But here's the part I still regret the most. We convinced both him and the police that we had nothing to do with it. We said we found the place in that state and were trying to clean it up. Incredibly, they believed us. No fines, no charges. We left as free men. We were absolute jerks. There's no excuse for it. Story 24. When my son was 18 months old, I was out grocery shopping with him. After loading the groceries into the car, I placed him in his car seat and was about to buckle him in when I noticed the shopping cart rolling away. I chased it down, returned, and completely forgot to secure his seatbelt. On the way home, I was about to turn into the bank when I heard him fiddling with the car door handle. A part of my brain registered that this was strange. He shouldn't have been able to reach it, but I brushed it off. As I made the turn, he opened the door and fell out of the car. We were moving quickly. I slammed the brakes and ran to him. A large pickup truck behind us also braked hard and stopped just inches away. My son was sitting on the ground crying. I picked him up. Somehow, he didn't have a single scratch or bruise. I rushed him back into the car, buckled him in properly, and drove off quickly as traffic was building, terrified that someone might call the authorities. I parked a few blocks away in an empty lot. I took him out to check him again. He was totally fine, walking around and smiling. I still can't believe he wasn't hurt. I never told my wife, and I don't plan to. Story 25. When I was in middle school and my younger brother was in elementary school, he acted in a very feminine way. At that time, I was dealing with some depression and insecurity, and one unhealthy way I coped was by taking my frustration out on someone else. Ironically, I was never mean to anyone at school. I had seen other kids get picked on and never wanted to be part of that. But when I got home, it was a different story. I would pick on my brother, calling him names and saying hurtful things like, "When you get to high school, you're going to get picked on." I was partly ashamed of how he acted, and instead of dealing with my own issues, I projected them onto him. My parents would punish me, grounding me or yelling, and rather than taking responsibility, I would just blame him. This happened almost every day for about 2 years. Fast forward 5 years. My brother has come out and has a boyfriend. We've both grown a lot, and we actually get along well now. I'm completely open and supportive of who he is. Still, I've never directly apologized to him for how I treated him back then. Not many days go by where I don't feel awful about it. If I were him, I don't know if I'd even want to talk to me. Story 26. Back in college, I got a summer internship at a local nonprofit. It was a great opportunity, and the boss was a really laid-back guy who lived on a large farm outside of town. Being a farmer, he understood the practical need for firearms, things like protecting livestock from predators. On the 4th of July, we had a company party out at his farm. Everyone got pretty drunk, including the boss. At some point, he brought out some firearms and started letting people shoot into his pond. It wasn't the safest decision, intoxicated people handling weapons, but no one got hurt. Being from a rural background myself, he trusted me with one of the guns. I got more intoxicated and went all out, pretending I was in some kind of action movie, shooting into the pond. The next morning, I sobered up and walked out to the pond. That's when I realized I had accidentally killed a family of beavers. Turns out he had hand-raised them and released them into the wild just months before. I still feel terrible about it. Story 27. When I was in elementary school, we used to play tag on the wooden play structures during recess. These structures were pretty tall, at least a story high, and had a big metal slide with a bar above it. I was pretty active, and one day during tag, a kid was chasing me, so I ran up to the top of the structure. I waited near the slide, and just as he was about to tag me, I jumped and held on to the metal bar, flipping over it and landing hard on my knees. When I looked around, the kid was gone, so I got up and kept playing. Recess ended shortly after, and then an ambulance showed up. Unbeknownst to me, while I had jumped, the other kid had tried to grab me and ended up slipping off the structure. He hit his head on the metal slide and several wooden posts before landing on the gravel. He transferred schools not long after, and I didn't see him again. A few years later, while visiting my old school, I found out he had suffered major brain damage and had been transferred to a special needs school. Tragically, he passed away a few years later due to complications from an infection. Story 28. I have a couple of experiences. They're not all terrible, but they've stuck with me over the years. When I was quite young, in junior school, England, a friend and I were just messing about, doing the kind of silly things kids do. For some reason, I bit his shoulder, like a vampire, no idea why. I didn't think I bit him that hard, but he bruised easily, and maybe I misjudged. He ended up crying with a huge bite-shaped mark and ran off to tell a teacher. I got seriously told off for that, and I felt awful. Probably not the worst thing I've done, but still lingers in my mind. This next one probably is the worst, though. Again, I was quite young, in junior school. We had a special PE, physical education lesson one day, where an American guest came to teach us a bit about American football. He was a big guy and he was black. I want to clarify, I wasn't raised to be hateful or anything, but at that age I had very little exposure to people of different backgrounds. As we stood in a line and he introduced himself, his name was Jerry, I think, I opened my mouth and asked loudly, "Can we call you something else?" and added a word referencing his appearance in a way that was completely inappropriate. The moment I said it, I knew I had done something wrong. It was one of those split-second moments where your brain catches up too late. I've felt bad about it ever since. It wasn't meant with hatred, but that doesn't make it any better. It was ignorance, and I wish I could go back and undo it. It was a lesson that stuck with me for life. Story 29. I was deployed overseas, and every day when we passed through a particular village, kids would throw rocks and whatever else they could at our vehicles. It wasn't too serious, just kids acting out. But if you were in the gunner seat, it felt like trying to dodge everything at once. Our gunner figured out that if we tossed candy to them, they'd stop. At first, he'd bring candy regularly, but over time he got frustrated with constantly being the one supplying it. That's when he came up with something extremely messed up. He found a flat pan from somewhere, I don't even know where, and asked for gloves from my med bag. What he did next was disturbing. He created fake candy by wrapping unpleasant things in candy wrappers to trick the kids. The next day, the kids gathered, laughing and excited, thinking they were about to get treats. At first, they were getting real candy, just enough to gain their trust. Then came the fake ones. Some of the kids reacted with confusion, others with visible discomfort, and a few even got sick. The mood changed quickly. Seeing their reactions hit me harder than I expected. That day made me reflect on just how easy it is to lose perspective in a stressful, chaotic environment. It's something I still think about, not because I'm proud of it, but because I recognize now how desensitized we had become. It was a turning point in how I viewed the impact we could have on people, even unintentionally. Story 30. When I was a teenager, I was hanging out in my best friend's room while he stepped out to help his dad. Other friends were around the house. At the time, he had a very attractive girlfriend, and I was the stereotypical, socially awkward, shy nerd. My friend was not. I had a quiet crush on her but kept it to myself. He had one of those large bed frames with storage compartments built into the headboard, and one of them was slightly open. Out of curiosity, I opened it all the way and found a folded piece of paper. I opened it and saw a photo of a woman's torso. Then I saw her face. It was his girlfriend. Something about the privacy of the moment, my attraction to her, and the thrill of it all overwhelmed my teenage mind. Without thinking, I folded the pictures back up and slipped them into my pocket. That night, I used them for personal satisfaction, more than once. But afterward, the weight of what I'd done hit me. I felt sick. I had invaded my best friend's trust and privacy and disrespected someone he cared about. Worse, when the photos went missing, he questioned everyone except me. He even told people he was sure I couldn't have been the one. That made it hurt more. I burned the pictures. I was physically sick for a week. To this day, I've never felt such intense guilt and shame. I've never told him. He's still my best friend, like a brother to me, and I doubt it would matter now, but I think about it often. It still sits with me when I reflect on the worst things I've ever done. Story 31. Back in grade 9, there was a kid in my geography class, coincidentally also named Cameron, who would throw paper at the back of my head every day. I asked him to stop, over and over again, for the entire semester. He never listened. On the last day of class, the teacher stepped out to speak with another teacher. That day, instead of paper, he threw a geography textbook at the back of my head. It hurt, and the whole class laughed. Something inside me snapped. I turned, jumped over the desk behind me, and tackled him. I pinned him down and hit him repeatedly, at least 15 times, until he had a concussion. The class went silent. I got in a lot of trouble around school after that, mostly through empty threats. I don't like fighting, and I wasn't someone who picked fights, but that day I'd had enough. I still don't regret it. No one ever messed with me again in high school. Story 32. When I was about 11 or 12, I went on a Boy Scout trip to Washington, D.C. The hotel had a shower with one of those detachable handheld sprayers, and being young and naive, I discovered by accident that it felt oddly good when spraying it a certain way. Unfortunately, I learned the hard way that if you spray water in that area long enough, your body reacts fast. I ended up leaving a mess in the shower, something far worse than water, and panicked. I bolted back to my room without cleaning it up. The next day, people discovered what happened, and the hotel staff had to clean it. Among the group, we started pointing fingers to figure out who had done it. I ended up blaming a fellow scout who had developmental challenges. He denied it, but everyone believed me. He broke down in tears. At the time, I felt like I had gotten away with it. But looking back now, I realize it was incredibly wrong. On every level. Blaming someone else, especially someone vulnerable, is something I deeply regret. Story 33. I spent most of my childhood finding creative ways to scare my little brother. We had just moved into a big old house with high ceilings and dim lighting. I was 11, he was 9. I didn't dislike him, I just thought it was hilarious. When he went to the bathroom, I'd stand outside the door making creepy sounds. If he asked who was there, I'd stay silent and jiggle the doorknob. Sometimes I'd climb the hallway walls and hang over the bathroom door, waiting to leap down and scream when he opened it. Other pranks were more subtle, turning off the lights in the TV, flipping the circuit breakers, hiding in the darkness to sneak up and grab him. I'd rearrange his room or attach things to strings to pull from afar. One night, I pushed it too far. He was coming downstairs in the dark, and I hid behind the banister. Just as he stepped onto the last stair, I let out the loudest, creepiest sound I could manage. He screamed and collapsed in tears, shaking. That was the last time I went that far. It stopped being funny after that. Story 34. In terms of actual impact on the world, the worst thing I've ever done may have been helping save my former roommate's life. He had attempted to jump out of the window of our dorm, but our RA had organized a few of us to help find him so the police could intervene. We were told by the police and university that everything would be handled with care and that they'd do their best to help him through it. They kept their word. My roommate came back to the dorm and locked himself in our room. He was holding a knife, the same one he had used to injure our RA during an earlier dispute. Naturally, we were hesitant to get involved directly. He was crying and yelling at us to leave, but we knew he had written a will to his best friend, so we feared for the worst. A school official tried to talk him out, but when he said he was going to jump, I was asked to use my key to open the door. We were immediately met with an emotionally distressed man wielding a knife. He didn't look anything like the person I once knew. Behind me stood a tall police officer who couldn't see into the room because of the angle. I waved him in. The rest is a blur. He jumped into action, wrestled my roommate down, asked me to help get the knife, and I remember being caught between the bed and a body, trying to keep the blade away during the scuffle. We thought we had done the right thing, but then things took a turn. My roommate dropped out of school shortly after and began using Hero. He pulled others into addiction with him, and someone in that circle died from an overdose. So even though we saved a life, part of me wonders what impact that life had afterward. I don't know if we made the world better or worse by stepping in. Story 35. There are many things I regret, but one of the worst was the revenge I took on a manager. He was one of those people who seemed to enjoy making others miserable. But the final straw was when he took credit for a report I wrote. He submitted it under his name and was praised for it, even getting considered for a promotion. That's when I snapped. I went to the Lost and Found, grabbed a bunch of unclaimed keys, and filled out a $500 reward if found card with his home address. Then I drove to the rougher side of town and tossed the keys near where people often hung out. 2 days later, a man showed up at his house with the keys, expecting the reward. When my manager refused and threatened to call the police, the guy got angry, keyed his car, and smashed his windshield using a concrete step. They got into a fight, and by the time the police arrived, the man ran off. My manager ended up with a lost tooth and about $2,500 in car damage. His wife was so shaken that they decided to relocate. But I wasn't done. A week later, he left me in charge of the store again. I planted a stack of explicit magazines in his briefcase, very inappropriate ones. After his church service, he came back to the store, grabbed his case, and handed it to his wife. I watched as she opened it, saw the contents, and completely lost it. 2 weeks later, he quit. He took a management job at a meatpacking plant, and on his second day caused a fire that shut the place down for 3 months. He was fired again. It wasn't my proudest moment, but part of me still feels like he had it coming. Story 36. I'm not sure this is the worst thing I've ever done, but it's what I feel the worst about. I'm 3 years older than my little brother. We were great friends, but I was also really hard on him. I was bigger, stronger, and unfortunately often mean. I was condescending, short-tempered, and sometimes physically aggressive. I'd make him cry often. As I turned 14 and started hanging out with other kids my age, my brother still just wanted to spend time with me. But I pushed him away. Worse, I'd mock him or even hit him in front of my friends just because he wanted to be included. Meanwhile, he had no real friends. He was a nerd, quiet, and clearly lonely. I could tell how much he still looked up to me and wanted to be close. I didn't give him the time of day. Then one day he tried to take his own life. That moment changed everything for me. I realized how much pain he was in and how deeply I had contributed to it. I quit being so cold. I quit being a jerk. Now I'm 21, he's 18. He has a great girlfriend, and we've become incredibly close. Honestly, he's probably my best friend now. I try every day to make it up to him. I used to know what it was like to feel isolated and bullied. And when he was going through that, I became just another person who hurt him. I wish I could undo it, but all I can do now is be better. Story 37. When I was little, we had a crossing guard who had a mental disability. I'm not sure of the details, but he had slurred speech and was slower than most. But he was also one of the kindest people I've ever met. Still, as little kids, we were cruel. We'd throw pine cones at him, laugh, and make fun of him. One day he had enough and reported me. I got in trouble at school and was sent home, suspended. That was also the first time my dad ever physically punished me. He was furious. I felt terrible for how I had treated that man, but at the time I was also angry that my dad reacted so harshly. I don't know why, but I had the idea that I would either hurt myself or make my dad regret everything. I took a bike chain and wrapped it around my neck in a way that it would tighten, hooked it to my bed's headboard, and lay down under a blanket with my feet sticking out. My family had to go out that day, and they kept calling me to get ready. I didn't respond. Eventually, my dad came to check. He grabbed my feet and tried to pull me out of bed. Each pull made the chain tighter. After several yanks, he pulled the blanket off and saw me turning purple, unable to breathe. They rushed to remove the chain. My mom broke down in tears, and my dad didn't speak to me for days. That whole series of events, how I treated someone kind, what it led to at home, and the fear I put in my parents, still haunts me. Story 38. Back in university, I worked on a film and TV project with a group of 4. It was a choose-your-own-adventure short film that used DVD menus to let the viewer pick story paths. It was a cool concept, and the execution turned out great. The reality, though, was that only 2 of us really did the work. Me and one other guy. We handled everything from writing and filming to editing. I was also the lead actor and stayed up all night to finish the final cut. When it came time to submit the project, I added our names to the end credits. He had been designated the director from the beginning, but I added my name too, telling myself it was fair since I did so much of the work. He saw it about 30 minutes before submission and asked, "WTF, man?" I brushed it off and said, "It's fine. We both did the work." He didn't argue and we handed it in. Later, I felt awful. Even though I dropped out of university a few years ago, I still think about it. One night I saw his number in my phone while I was drunk and had a small panic attack. I deleted it to avoid the guilt. The saddest part? I had an alternate version of the credits without any names. It would have taken 3 minutes to retype them properly and submit the clean version. We all passed and even got praise for the originality of the project. But that small act of selfishness still sits in the back of my mind. Story 39. I attended a high school outside my district, but one of my close friends went to the local school near where we lived. He had to attend a night program for students who needed extra academic support, either to catch up on missed work or get help to avoid failing. There were 3 of us that night, and we brought a bag of paintballs with us. When he got to the classroom, he handed his assignments to someone else to complete while we hung around the school. We ended up walking through random classrooms and pelting the computer screens with paintballs. In some rooms, we took the attendance books and scattered student cards all over the floor. We kept going, hitting several rooms like that. When it was time to leave, we tried to exit through a back door, but passed by a handicap ramp. For some reason, I grabbed a fire extinguisher and hosed it down completely. The next day, it made the local news. The damage was reported and the school suspended the night program entirely. A lot of students who relied on it for extra help lost that support. We never got caught, and I stayed quiet about it. But I've always felt guilty knowing that something we treated as a prank ended up hurting people who really needed that program to succeed. Story 40. My junior year of high school, some friends and I decided to go mailboxing. It was summer and around the 4th of July, and since I was known as the fireworks guy, my dad used to buy them wholesale and resell them, I brought along some firecrackers. At one stop, we targeted the home of a girl we all used to mock. I placed a massive firecracker in her mailbox, easily the equivalent of a quarter stick of dynamite. I lit it, jumped into the car, and we drove off. As we turned the corner, another car was approaching. Her mailbox exploded into pieces. The next day, some other friends casually mentioned they had seen a mailbox blow up, and then I found out the girl hadn't come to school. When she did return, she was covered in bandages and scars. I was shocked. I later learned that after the explosion, she assumed it had been targeted at her personally. She was already struggling emotionally, and this incident pushed her over the edge. She harmed herself badly and nearly lost her life. She's never been the same since. I can't describe the way I felt when I found out. It wasn't just regret, it was horror. I had never meant for any of that to happen, but I did it, and it will always be a part of me. Story 41. I know I'm late to the conversation, but this is something I've always needed to get off my chest. I didn't mean for this to be so long, so if you've read it all, thank you. My parents divorced when I was in junior high. My dad had an affair, and my mom kicked him out. Honestly, I wasn't too upset about the divorce. He was in the army, and for most of my childhood, he wasn't really around. After returning from Desert Storm, he mostly drank and played computer games in his home office. Not long after, my mom moved us from Virginia to Texas to live with my paternal grandmother. During this time, it never crossed my mind to keep in touch with my dad. I had no anger toward him, I just didn't call. Looking back, I was selfish. A few years later, he had an accident at work and suffered a severe concussion. It got worse over time, but doctors dismissed his concerns until it was too late. An infection spread, and they had to remove part of his brain, specifically the part that helps convert thoughts into speech. After that, communication with him became nearly impossible. He could think one word and say something completely unrelated. Though he understood everything, people began treating him as if he didn't. He hated living with his mother. He couldn't work anymore, and he turned to alcohol to cope, though it triggered seizures. We lived just a few neighborhoods away, so we did see him sometimes, but not as much as we could have. Even when we did visit, his drinking made the visits uncomfortable. I'm sure he could see we didn't want to be there. Even though we weren't close, I always admired him. I used to wish I'd been a boy so I could connect with him more. He was a flawed person, but to me he was a hero. I'd sneak into his office when he wasn't home and play his old games or read his Dungeons and Dragons books, pretending I was on some magical adventure. I wanted to be just like him. I thought we'd have more time. One day I was home alone and saw his name on the caller ID. I let it go. I didn't want to hear him sound sad. The last time I'd seen him, he told me how much he hated Texas and said that when he died, he wanted to be buried in Arlington Cemetery. I didn't think much of it. He said it casually, mid-rant. Right before I left that day, I thought I heard him say my name, which was odd because he hadn't been able to say names since the surgery. But I ignored it. Less than a week later, the phone rang in the middle of the night. Before my mom came to tell me, I already knew. He'd had a seizure, and he was gone. I didn't cry at first, I just felt empty. I was devastated, yes, but part of me also felt relief. Not because I wanted him gone, but because the weight of watching him suffer was unbearable. I hate myself for admitting that. I miss him so much. I wish I'd been mature enough to be there for him. His final years were his worst, and I was too afraid or uncomfortable to be what he needed. It still haunts me, especially that last time. If he really did say my name, it meant something, and I turned my back. I can't blame myself for his choices, but I know I was in his thoughts, and I carry that with me every day. Story 42. Here goes. This is probably the most roundabout way I could tell this story, but it needs to be said. Everything is true, and while it may not be the most horrible thing ever done, it definitely lives rent-free in my mind. A few years back, I was working at a large laboratory in the Chicagoland area. I lived with 4 other guys, scientists, all of us, and occasionally, being the nerds we were, we'd go downtown and hang around hotel bars in the middle of the day. We thought it would be a great way to meet women. It wasn't. One day we were at the Hard Rock Hotel lobby bar, eating cheese and drinking whiskey. A large group came in, looked like they were doing some kind of scavenger hunt. There were women, but we had no idea how to approach anyone. In our minds, we assumed that if we looked sophisticated enough, someone might just come over and invite us to their room. Obviously, that never happened. Eventually, I convinced the group to move to the bar for better visibility. We ordered more drinks and chatted with the bartender. He told us where in the city to meet classy women, mostly nightclubs, and suggested we go home and change if we wanted a shot. It wasn't useful advice, but it added to the growing absurdity of our outing. Then I decided that spending more money might somehow make us more attractive. So we ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon and had it turned into champagne cocktails. I don't remember what was in them, something with Chambord, but they were purple, and to be honest, very tasty. At that point, our goal shifted from meeting women to loudly saying ridiculous things and asking where the nightlife crowd was. By 3 p.m., we were completely drunk. Eventually, we admitted defeat in our mission. But then I had another idea. If we couldn't find women at bars, where would they be guaranteed to be smart, curious, and possibly impressed by scientists like us? The Museum of Science and Industry. It sounded perfect. We settled the check, it wasn't cheap, and decided to walk. Google Maps will confirm this was a terrible idea. It's not a short walk. We headed toward Lakeshore Drive and started making our way down. Of course, it wasn't long before nature called. We were in the middle of a park, and rather than find a bathroom, we took turns ducking into bushes while the rest of us kept watch. Not the most discreet plan, but that's what we were working with. During my turn, I decided we should stay within the parks, so we'd have easier access to cover if needed. Later on, I had to go again and saw what I thought were some black garbage bags in the grass. I walked over, unzipped, and began one of the longest bathroom breaks of my life. It felt endless, like a scene out of a movie. In my drunken mind, it seemed like an event worth documenting. So I pulled out my camera and snapped a few pictures of the spot, muttering things like, "Take that trash," without really thinking.